So, we're here today to talk about how to stop fighting with your partner. And I love this topic because toxic arguing, toxic conflict affects so many couples. And sadly, it is a huge factor and a huge reason why many couples actually end up getting a divorce. So, what I really want to talk about today is really looking at what starts the conflict so that if conflict in your relationship is something that's plaguing you, you can start to witness things with a different lens and through a different um, viewpoint. So we're going to talk about what's actually starting the conflict, because it's never what people think is actually starting the conflict. We're going to talk about what makes that conflict worse and what makes it spiral. And then, of course, some tools around how to end it. And so that you don't end up one of those couples who, simply because they haven't developed some of these skills, end up thinking we can't work things out, or there's no way that we can get along. And those are some of the saddest divorces that I see. You know, I always say I am never here to totally save every marriage, because some marriages really shouldn't be saved. But there are many, many, many relationships that I see where developing and improving on some of your own skills actually has a huge impact on your relationship, and because of that allows your relationship to head in a much better direction. So you start to create a totally different momentum and get back to that place of feeling like you felt when you were first getting married or first together, which is that feeling of connection, being in love, and wanting to build a life, and in many cases a family together. Okay, so let's talk about conflict. So, conflict is almost never about what a couple thinks it's about. I saw a quote once that said something around the fact that most conflicts started 20 years ago. It started before you ever met. And I think that no true words have ever been spoken. So, nobody starts a fight from a really high vibe place. So, let's start there, because, of course, everything is about the energy within you and the energy between you. So when an argument is starting, it's never starting from a high vibe place. And nobody also engages in a fight or an argument from a really high vibration place. And why is this? It's because a conflict is always about a desire to be agreed with or a desire to not be misunderstood. So disagreements, when there's a disagreement between you and your partner, it's always about, my opinion or on a subject or whatever is very different than your opinion, and I want you to agree with me. The other area where you see a lot of conflict, where it's sort of opinion based but a little bit different, is when you're feeling attacked or you're feeling like your partner's opinion about something that you've done doesn't feel good to you. Okay, so this is the key to understanding these dynamics. Whenever there's this sort of conflict, well, or any conflict, it always starts with what a lot of people will call a trigger. And I'll use that word just because it's the most used or understood word that there is. So what a trigger really is it's a part of you from the past that isn't healed. So that unhealed part of you sits over there, hiding in the shadows, or on the sidelines, until an opportunity for her to be seen and healed again shows up. So that part of you, any unhealed part of you, is always waiting for an opportunity to be healed. But of course, she doesn't, when she shows up as her unhealed self, that unhealed version of her just keeps recreating the same problems over and over and over again in your life. And that's really how you can view a trigger. So something happens that brings her, to the forefront. And that part of you now, in this argument or disagreement, is the part of you that's guiding the disagreement. So this unhealed part of you is guiding the disagreement. So the larger part of you, which is the grown up part, the part that has is much more connected to and aligned with your spirit self and your source energy, that part of you is the part that keeps trying to move forward, and you keep trying to create more happiness and prosperity, and that's what you deserve. But the unhealed part of you really wants to be seen and heard and loved. But her vibration isn't in a loving place. So instead, she sees things through that lens. She sees things through that unhealed, low vibration, hurt lens. So whenever something happens that she sees as hurtful, she's back and she's now the one guiding. And of course, this is exactly the same thing that is happening with your partner. So he also, just as all of us do, he or she also has these unhealed parts of them. And it's that unhealed part that does the attacking. It's the unhealed part that gets defensive or deflects or whatever. And we'll talk a little bit about those toxic conflict behaviors as well. So whenever there's a conflict, just know that that's the part of your partner that's showing up, and that's the part of you that is showing up. And it's really important to be able to recognize that. The most important thing about that is when you can see that your partner has these parts the same way that you have those unhealed parts, it triggers a little bit more compassion. It makes you see that person as, if he or she is showing up as a jerk, it makes you realize that's not who he really is. Right now in this moment, he's showing up that way, or right now in this moment, you're showing up that way. But just as you know that that's not the whole you, it's also important for you to take a step back sometimes and be able to recognize that's not the whole of who your partner is as well. And this reminds me that, of course, everything that I talk about, especially when it comes to conflict, I don't want this advice to be taken out of context. So this is not to be taken within the context of a physically abusive relationship. So if there is physical abuse in your relationship, you need to seek local help and try to get yourself out of that situation with local professionals who can help you with that. So moving on, I like to do that disclaimer at the beginning, and I didn't, so I just wanted to add it in there. So I can hear, a lot of people already in their thoughts talking about the fact that, or thinking that they can be thinking, well, yeah, but I can be in a really great mood and my partner gets angry about something or tries to start a fight. So maybe I was in a high vibe, but then my partner comes along and ruins it. And I completely understand that. And I think that there's many couples that have those dynamics where one partner feels like they can just be bebopping along happy throughout their day, and then they get completely blindsided because their partner's now mad about something, and that ruins the evening or ruins the day or the week or the weekend or whatever, because now a conflict has begun. And if you're the one who is often feeling attacked in your relationship, it can be a little bit harder to see your triggers because it feels instead like you're always dealing with their triggers. And I wanted to bring that up because it's kind of like with the enabler personality type. It's a trickier spot to be in because it's really easy to feel like it's always their triggers that are causing the argument. And I see that, and I see that in a lot of relationships. But if that's you, if you're in that position, I want you to start taking a look at how their triggers, and when they attack you, what comes up for you, because that's actually your trigger. So your trigger is activated when your partner is upset with you. And so your trigger at, that unhealed part of you shows up to say, no, don't be mad at me, you don't understand. And you might be the one who often steps into that place of feeling like you're always defending yourself. So really there's kind of four things that you can understand about these unhealed parts. So first of all, everybody has them. So just as the person who, starts most of the arguments has them, and so something happens, they see it through a certain lens, they're triggered, and they attack or they blame right away. That the person on the other end of that, their unhealed parts also show up if they start engaging in an argument, because what that means is that part of them that doesn't want to be misunderstood, doesn't want to be blamed, doesn't want somebody mad at them, that part of them shows up and reacts in an unhealthy way as well. So there's some people, and these people are, have evolved and are highly self-regulated, and that's always the goal. There are some people who are able to, if their partner is upset with them, if they're in a high vibe place, the larger part of them remains in control of all of them. So those triggers, as those unhealed parts of you get more and more healed, and you feel attacked, all of a sudden, because that unhealed part of you isn't there anymore, or is much weaker or much more healed, they're not as loud. So they might still show up a little bit, but instead the larger part of you can stay in a more high vibe place and responds from a place of love, because the lens that you're now looking at is a healthier lens as opposed to the unhealed lens. So as I said, there's four things to understand about those unhealed parts that we all have. One, everybody has them. Two is that they can always be healed. So when you hear people talk about, well, that's just who I am, that person is just really arguing for their limitations, and they're really arguing for why they don't need to change. And anyone who argues for their limitations or argues against growth and change and tries to hold on to those parts of them that are hurting other people, they're also holding on to the parts of them that are hurting their own life. And unfortunately, because of that, they will continue to create that problem in their own life, whether it's in this relationship or every future relationship. So there is nobody who can't be healed, especially if they are willing to witness those unhealed parts and take a look at them. That's the first step towards healing them. So everyone has them. Everybody has the ability to heal them. And the other thing to know is that to heal them, all you have to do to start is see them. You have to start witnessing those parts of you with no judgment. And it's hard when it feels like, okay, well, I can do that for myself, but what if my partner doesn't do that? But what I see so, so, so often is when one person in the relationship is able to start taking a look at their own unhealed parts, and they start showing up differently in the relationship, whether that's about conflict or any other area of the relationship, it has a huge impact on how the other person shows up. And as I always say, if you don't believe me, just think about how much you think it would impact you if your partner changed. And it's the same thing. When you change, even if you're not the one who starts all the arguments or is the attacker, when you change, it can have a huge impact on how your partner responds to you and shows up in the relationship. And the fourth thing, so as I said, everyone has them. They can always be healed. To heal them, you have to see them. And the fourth thing is that these unhealed parts really make up your core wounds. And these core wounds are the lens that 99% of your relationship problems will be based on. Okay, so let me just repeat that. Your core wounds, those unhealed parts of you, when you have relationship problems that you're having a hard time understanding or fixing or working through, almost always those relationship problems are based on those core unhealed parts of you that are showing up in the relationship, because the more and the worse those parts are, the stronger they are, the more likely they will continue to create the same or similar problems in your life moving forward. So if you want to create a different future than what your past looks like, those are the parts that you need to work on healing and bringing. You don't leave them behind, but you bring them with you in a new healed version. So as a side note, on rare occasions, some of those core wounds, or a lot of people, not a lot, but some people, their core wounds are actually not relationship related. And these are the people who are really doing well in relationships. So, and maybe you know them, there's not a lot, but I would say about 15% of the population do really, really, really well in relationships. In other words, these are the people who have happy marriages. They're, for 60 years, they're happily married. Um, but let me tell you, those people, it's not that those people don't have any core wounds. They still have those wounds, but those wounds show up for them in different ways and maybe create different issues. Maybe these people have a lot of struggles in their career, or maybe they're, really terrible with money because of some of these core wounds. So it's kind of an interesting thing when you look at some of those couples who are really happy all the time. That's why. It's because the core wounds that they do have, because we all have them, um, just aren't as impactful on their relationships. But for the majority of people, your core wounds do impact your relationship and often impact other areas of your life as well. So I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a core wound. So I'll give you an example of a core wound in action. So I was chatting with a client the other day, and she and her husband, so they've got 4 kids together. Their kids are all teenagers, very busy with sports. And both parents are working full time. And so they're really in the thick of it when it comes to life and family and business and relationships and all of that stuff. And then to add fuel to the fire, or in this case, water, they had a flood in their kitchen. So they had to move into an Airbnb while their kitchen is being renovated. So them and their 4 kids move into this Airbnb. And so, of course, this causes all sorts of inconveniences in their life. So, as you can imagine, she really wants to move things along with this kitchen renovation so they can get back home. So they're living, I think they're living outside of their kids' school district. So now they're trying to get their kids' school because they can't take the bus, and, it's causing issues in terms of their work situations and pickups and drop-offs and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, so she made some design choices with regards to the kitchen renovation. And she had talked to her husband about it a few times, that, I'm picking out the granite and the faucets and new lights and flooring and all of these things. And he expressed that he really wanted to be involved, or at least to see some of those decisions. So, which she was happy to do. So after supper, they sit down one night. They turned on a television show. I think she grabbed a basket of laundry, and so she's folding laundry, and the TV's on, and she had emailed him all of the choices that she wanted him to take a look at and kind of agree to, so that she could make the order first thing in the morning, and they could go ahead with getting these products in for the renovations. So as so he's got his laptop open, he's looking at the emails, but he keeps ignoring it and going back to watching the television show. And she keeps repeating to him, it's getting late. I'd really like to go to bed. Like, could you just decide on each of the things I've sent you? Yeah, no, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to look at it. And he doesn't. So she's finished folding her laundry. He's barely looked at his laptop at all of the choices. He hasn't made any decisions. And there she goes. She's upset. And so she says to him, you know what? Forget it. I'm going to go take a shower. I'll do it myself as usual. And kind of was basically like, this is obviously not important to you. You don't care how much this is affecting me. And we're never going to get this renovation done because you won't help, and yada, yada, yada. And so she storms out of the room, goes to have a shower, and goes to bed really angry. Okay. So this is a typical pattern in a lot of relationships where something happens, you make meaning out of it, and then there's an argument ensues. He, I don't think, said much, maybe got a little bit defensive, but I think was kind of dismissive about it, like, oh, you're always mad, that kind of thing. So her core wound, going back to this idea of triggers, is that she's not important to anyone. Okay, so it's a classic example of how a conflict begins because she is seeing the entire situation through this very low vibe lens of her wound. Her wound is always going to show her everything through that lens. Her lens is, I'm not important to anyone. In this case, I'm not important to him. So whenever there is something that happens that causes a bit of stress, you know what your core wound is based on the meaning that that incident means to you. So it's very easy for her to see, I'm not important, because that's the lens that she sees a lot of situations through. Now, interestingly, his core wound is, I'm never good enough, right? And so in fact, that's probably the wound that was making it hard for him to make a decision. So someone who has a core wound around I'm never good enough is very likely to procrastinate, very likely to sort of not help out a lot because they'll feel like, well, I don't ever do things right, this sort of thing. So what happens? So she attacks, although in that moment she didn't feel like it was an attack. In that moment, she feels like he hurt me, even though, of course, he would look at that and think, I didn't do anything. I'm just sitting here watching TV. But in her mind, she feels very hurt because the story is already spiraling in her mind. He's thinking he didn't do anything because he's not seeing it through the lens of, wow, my wife is overwhelmed with all the changes and all the decisions that she's got to make. I haven't been helping out. This is impacting her more than I know. So he's not seeing it that way. But of course, she's seeing how the fact that he doesn't see it that way means that she's unimportant. So she attacks, he defends, even if he doesn't verbally get defensive, he defends himself by maybe putting up another wall or gets defensive by just dismissing her. So at that time, they both think they're now, so she's gone off to bed mad. He stays on the couch, also mad and frustrated. And they think that this is about the renovations, or they think at the very best that it's about him not helping. But in fact, it spirals, for many couples, that kind of an argument spirals to a million other things about, well, you don't care about how much work this is causing me, and I've done all the pickups this week and you don't do anything. And so now we're fighting about the imbalance of work around the house, or wherever it happens to spiral. I told you to stop at the grocery store and you didn't do it, and that's what took so long to, right? Like, it just goes in all sorts of different directions oftentimes in these arguments. But it was never about who helps out more. About what it's really about is her, say, 8-year-old self whose dad wasn't there for her, and that version of her is the one who just looked over and felt like, see, I'm not important, because that's what she sees. And then that version of him, who maybe at some point in his childhood or in a previous relationship or whatever it was, he came to believe at some point that he couldn't do anything right. So now who has he attracted? He's attracted to him a wife who's very willing to confirm his belief. And she has attracted to her a husband who confirms hers, right? So then enters this toxic conflict, and now we've spiraled. So we're already seeing the situation through two lenses. So those lenses don't give us an accurate view of what's actually happening. To have an accurate view of what's actually happening, you need to step into love. You need to step into that spirit part of you that sees things through a much different lens. Because that part of you doesn't see your spouse the way that the hurt part of you sees your spouse. And at the very least, that part of you that's in love or steps into a loving energy and a loving vibration, they're not going to, at the very least, respond in a not loving way, because that's the second thing that happens when conflict shows up, or when that lens takes over, or that unhealed part of us decides to take over. And that's where we get reactionary or not self-regulated. Now we've stepped into one of those four toxic conflict behaviors. So the behavior of first one, of course, is the attack, and this is the most obvious one. So this is the blamer, the critic, the one who kind of always feels like they're the one who's starting the argument. The next one is the counterattack. So this is the person who then turns around and says basically, yeah, well, you did this, right? So they say, you're saying that I don't help. Well, I don't think you help. Or they just try to turn the blame right around. The other one is, of course, the deflection. So that's where we now deflect and we start talking about something entirely different. It's always another argument, an argument that can start. And if you have a relationship where you often feel like the conversation goes from here to here to here and it's all over, and then all of a sudden it's like we're not even talking about what we started talking about, it's because one or both of you is very good at deflecting. And it's a really toxic behavior in an argument, because then you end up having a whole bunch of little arguments and none of them have any resolution, and there's just more and more hurt piling on. And then the fourth behavior is the defender. And so, of course, the defender, they always just try to defend themselves. And sometimes that defensiveness, as I said, looks like being dismissive or, you know, sort of begging the person to understand or to not misunderstand you. But usually there's an attack defender game or pattern that plays out in a relationship. All of those responses are all triggers. They're an unhealed part of you. So whether you're the attacker or whether you're the defender, and whether you're as I said, if you're the person who starts off bebopping through life having a great day and then all of a sudden you're blindsided by your partner's anger, and you step into one of those toxic conflict behaviors of attack, counterattack, deflect, or defend, just know that that is still an unhealed part of you that has shown up. So whether it's justified or not, it's not healthy. So people will say, well, what am I supposed to do if he's mad at me? And I always say, you can argue to the death about why you have a right to attack back or defend back or treat them the way they're treating you. But I will tell you that is never going to lead you to a happy place. I've never in my life seen a couple get healthier by deciding that they're going to, if one person treats the other one like crap, that now we both get to treat each other like crap. Well, why should I be nice if he isn't nice? Well, why should I help her if she never helps me, right? So all that is a big, very fast, often race to the bottom. And it's a race to divorce and unhappiness. So in order to shift these patterns, the key is to start first by witnessing what hurt part of you is beaking in your ear. So in the case of this client of mine doing the kitchen renovation, what would have happened when, as she's folding the laundry and he's not paying attention to what she wants him to do on his laptop, and instead he's watching television, and this part of her is saying to her, see, you're not important to him. He doesn't care about this. He doesn't care if we're in this Airbnb for the next 6 months, right? So that hurt part of her is beaking in her ear. The first step to healing is to just notice it and to just think, wait, is there any evidence to the contrary of what this hurt part of me is saying? Is this my core wound lens showing up again to sabotage my happiness? And when you get good at least asking yourself that question, what happens is you become the spirit part of you. You become the larger part of you based in love, witnessing the hurt part of you. And the goal isn't ever to push her aside. The goal is to just bring her along and ask her some questions. And often then to be able to say, well, there's actually lots of evidence that I'm very important to him. He did all of these things for me this past week or month, or he works really hard for our family, or despite all of the ups and downs of our relationship, he's still here, just like I am. And so there's often a lot of things that you can do to help yourself break down that hurtful lens that you're seeing the situation through, and to recognize that that hurt part of you, it needs to come along, but just be healed, just even if just a little bit. And what can happen then is you don't react in a hurtful way. So that spiral that happens in your relationship, you've just stopped it at the top before it kept going, right? Because the spiral starts here, someone does this and then this, and right, and it just goes, it's all these little points in the spiral that bring you to the bottom. So the sooner you're able to witness it and stop the reactivity and the hurtful behavior, whether it's on your part or reacting to his hurtful behavior, the sooner you're able to witness that and go back up and start trying to head back towards a higher vibration of love, the more likely that your relationship is going to be strengthened, right? And so then you respond in a different way. So, a healthier response in this situation, she's feeling frustrated that he's not helping with the decisions. A healthier response would simply be, okay, you're watching your show. That's fine. I'm going to go have a shower. Take a look at that when you have a minute. But I'm going to make the order tomorrow morning so that I know we both want to get out of this Airbnb. So if you want to email me back if I'm already asleep, or if you want to talk about it after your show's done and I'm out of the shower, that sounds great, right? So it's just addressing a situation instead of blowing it up into a huge conflict that's hurtful. Just seeing it through a different lens of love is often a huge has a huge impact on where that night goes, or where that weekend or that week goes. And remember, those moments and those days and those weekends, that's what makes up an entire marriage. So when you keep having all of these incidents piling up, all of a sudden your marriage is painted with this conflict rather than being painted with love and compassion and support. And that's really what everybody's looking for. If you've been struggling in your relationship, if you feel like you've lost yourself and you'd like to figure things out and really step into the happiness and prosperity that the universe wants for you, click the link below, join our community over in the Facebook group, Relationship Answers for Women. There's also a link to download my best-selling book, When Marriage Needs a Miracle, absolutely free. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for being here.